So we have been in a series that I have titled Thoughts from Southern New Mexico. And whenever I first came to New Mexico, I heard all about this young man who was a gunslinger of the Wild West. I wanted to say that at least one time. It sounded cool. But anyway, so this morning I want us to talk a little bit about Billy the Kid. But before we do that, I think we need to start a little bit. I want to talk about a few instances here, but Catherine McCarty, she had a horrible disease that we now know as tuberculosis. And so what they found, and as many have found and realized, that when you come to this area, it's a drier climate, right? And the drier climate seems to help some with tuberculosis. And so she moved her whole family here. She met a man and was married in Santa Fe, but then they moved down to Silver City. I'm going to assume that's southern New Mexico. I should know my geography. My silver people are in the back. But anyway, so they moved there, and while she was there, her disease started to get worse. Now, she taught her young boys, one of them we would know as later as Billy the Kid, to be respectful, to be kind. And many say that as a young boy, nobody would have ever thought that he would turn to a life of crime. There's a legend that has it that Billy and a friend went to go and steal some jewelry from a family, and what happened is the two boys got caught. And Billy had to go stand before his mother, and his mom wanted him to understand that this is not acceptable. Now, life was short for her. She knew her end was coming. And so what happens is she gives him this long lecture of, I'm disappointed. I mean, you all know the lecture. I mean, come on. We have parents in here. You've done it. But what happens is Billy says, I will not do this again. Well, what happens is his mother, she passes away. And it leaves Billy, I believe he was the age of 13 years old, without a mother. And his stepfather was busy working in the mines, and he eventually abandoned the family, which left Billy all alone. And so he had to decide if he was going to keep the promise or was he not. Instead, he decided not to. And it was around this time that he met up with another young friend, and they went and they stole laundry and some guns from a laundromat. Now, I don't know who carries and puts their pistol through the washer. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to clean them or not. I'm just saying that's what it says, okay? So anyway, he gets arrested, and the sheriff, it takes pity on the young man. And so he locks him up and puts him in jail and is hoping that, maybe some time in jail will help him realize that this is not the life that he should live. And well, what happens is Billy ends up escaping from jail. And he goes on, and then eventually, a few years later, he steals some horses that belonged to a man named John Tunsil. And when he is arrested, and John Tunsil goes and he visits him in jail. And after Billy gets out of jail and gets out of prison, John Tunsil hires him to be a rancher and a hired gun to protect his cattle. And they're saying that Tunsil was teaching him how to be a man and what it looks like. And it really seemed like Billy was starting to turn his life around until Tunsil leaves the ranch with Kid and 4 other men, and they're transporting horses to Lincoln. And on their way, a posse that includes James Dolan, Billy Matthews, Jesse Evans, and Buckshot Roberts. Now, that's a name. They order his livestock seized, and what happens is they shoot Tunsil. And what happens is this ends up starting that whole Lincoln County war that you have all heard about, that I just found out a few months ago. We don't talk about that in Texas history. Don't judge me. So anyway, but after the involvement of this Lincoln County war, he goes back to the life he only knew, and that was a life of crime. Now some of you are wondering, why bring this up? This is so random, Darian, but I want to take a moment and I want to say something. There are 3 people that we know of, at least, who tried to reach and get to Billy the Kid to turn his life around. But possibly more, right? And yet he chose to live the life he lived. And so this morning what I want to do is I want to have a conversation with 2 groups of people. One of you, I want to step all over your toes. And the other, I want you to give yourself a break. Is that fair? So if you have your Bibles, turn with me over to Genesis chapter 4. We're going to start out looking at Genesis chapter 4, verses 2 through 5. Genesis chapter 4, starting in verse 2, it says, "Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept the flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering of the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Then the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offerings. But on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor, so Cain was very angry and his face was downcast." I'm actually going to read, there's a few more verses, I'm sorry. I'm going to slip over here real quick. I'm going to read this because this is important. And it says, "When the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it.' Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is your brother Abel?' 'I don't know.' 'Am I my brother's keeper?' The Lord said, 'What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth.' Cain said to the Lord, 'My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driven from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me.' But the Lord said to him, 'Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over.' Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden." So we see at the beginning, Adam and Eve, they have 2 children. We see that Cain and Abel, the first picture-perfect family of the Bible, right? I think you guys called Brady Bunch the perfect family back in the day, right? So the Brady Bunch of the Bible, they have a family. And what happens is these 2 kids, they grow up and they grow up under a household. They have rules. There are things you should and shouldn't do. They also had the ability to walk and talk with God. Isn't that nice? And so we see all of this is going on. And so there's a great foundation to have good and strong kids. And so what happens is that both Cain and Abel, they both give sacrifices to the Lord. And it tells us that Cain brings him the fruits of his labor in the fields. He gives him some of the differing offerings from the fields. But then Abel, he comes and he gives him the fat portions of the firstborn of his flock. And what happens is God looks on favor with Abel's offering, but he doesn't look on as favorably as he does on Cain's offering. And what happens is Cain gets angry. Cain is upset. he thinks to himself as, how dare he like Abel's offerings more than mine? I worked hard. That's what Cain is saying, is how dare he choose Abel over me? I worked just as hard in the fields, if not harder. I don't know. I haven't done a whole lot of farm work, but I bet Ryan can tell you if he had to choose between being a rancher or a farmer and which one was a little bit more difficult, I would think working in the fields. And so Cain is upset. He's angry with the fact is, how dare he choose Abel? And what does God do? God comes and he speaks to Cain. And he's explaining to him that, he's angry and all of this. And what does God say? God says, sin is crouching at your door. You can continue this way of rage. You can continue this way of anger. You can go out and do all of this, but sin is crouching at your door. You have a decision to make. This is, what happens if you walk down this road. And what is God doing? He's trying to guide this young man to make the right decision, to turn away from his anger and turn away from his rage. He gave him a choice. And in the same way, we are given a choice, right? Don't we have a choice on the decisions that we make? Don't we have a decision on how we interact with other people, what we do, what doors we open, what we choose? Because here's what I believe, and this may be wrong, but I am the captain of my life, and God's guiding me too. But at the end of the day, it's up to me to decide if I'm going to follow God or am I not. Am I going to take the wisdom and teachings and everything else that you guys have taught me, my family has taught me, what I've learned about God, what I've learned about church, what I've learned about community, or am I not? It's up to me to decide that. And so we have the decision that we have to decide is, are we going to choose to do what is right, or are we going to choose to do what's wrong? Will I choose to break the law, or will I choose not to? Will I choose to take my wife's awesome Apple Watch and keep it for myself, or not? But I think it goes deeper than that. Okay, I'm going to be real with you for a minute. There are people in your life that you know this. Will they choose to take the needle or will they not? I have an uncle who's spent his whole life in prison. He wasn't taught to break the law. He wasn't taught to do what he did. But that was the life he chose. I can't change that. And what happens is sometimes we have people who want to blame everybody else for our mistakes. Hey, it's not my fault that I'm like this. You never were there. It's not my fault that or sometimes maybe you've heard this. It's not my fault that they cheated. Then whose fault was it? We have to choose what we are going to do. And we cannot sit there and blame everybody else for our failures and shortcomings. I hate to say this, okay? And this is going to sound bad coming from your preacher, okay? But I get tired of it. I get tired of hearing everybody pointing the finger at everybody else but themselves. And so what I hope and I pray is that at some point we are going to grow into a civilization and a country and a nation that takes responsibility for their own actions. Because it's your decision. It's not mine. And I think, are we going to listen and grow and understand God, or are we not? We have the decision to choose, and we cannot blame anybody else. And I think about it as, Billy the Kid, he had many opportunities to change his life. He had many chances to do what was right. He had many chances to go back and be a law-abiding citizen. There were people who wanted to stand before him and guide him. And what did he do? He chose to live and walk the life that he walked. I was reading an article, and they always say is, and we'll talk about this in one of the next slides, but what it said was we cannot blame his mother for Billy's outcome, because he wasn't raised that way. He wasn't raised to be a murderer. He wasn't raised to do all of the horrible things that he did. But like Billy, often, actually realistically, let me just take off the often, we will reap what we sow. Can't blame anybody else. We can only blame ourselves. We may have grown up in, some of you may have grown up in hard households and everything else, and you maybe had tough parents, tough relationships, or whatever you want to say or point to. But at the end of the day, you have to make the decision of where you're going in your life. And so, what path are you going to choose? But let's continue on as we talk about the warning that God gave Cain, and what does that mean? And what we see is, well, what does Cain do after he has this conversation? It seems like immediately he tells Abel, "Hey, let's go out to the field." And what does he do? He had God's warning. He had God's wisdom. He knew what God told him that this would lead if he didn't listen and he didn't obey. And what does he do? He murders his brother Abel in the middle of the field in cold blood. The first murder of the Bible has just taken place. Sin is even more in the world than it was before. Cain didn't listen to God. And what happens is God comes along, and I have to believe God knew, but we're going to pretend that he doesn't. And he comes along, and he's asking, where's your brother, Cain? Where's your brother? And then I love Cain's response. Am I my brother's keeper? Did you put me in charge of making sure where he was at all points? Am I supposed to have tags on him? Is that my job? And what happens is God is in shock when he starts to realize, he's like, his blood is crying out from the ground. What have you done? You chose this path, even though I warned you what will happen. I told you what was going to be, and yet you didn't listen. And so what does he do? He curses Cain. He tells him, no longer are you going to be able to work the field. It won't grow. Nothing will work anymore. It's true. Sometimes we warn people and we tell people this is what's going to happen if you decide to keep following the path that you're walking down. And then whenever it happens, God, what does he do? He holds on to what he said. And so he punishes Cain. And because of that punishment, he can no longer farm, and he is a restless wanderer on the earth. And he tells God, this is too much, this is way too much for me to bear, they're going to kill me. And sometimes one of my Bible professors joked, and the question was, who? Sorry, we'll work on that later. Come talk to me later. But anyway, so he's a restless wanderer, and God says, no, I'm going to protect you. You will not die, but you will wander for the rest of your life. You decided to murder your brother. You weren't raised like that. Nobody taught you how to do that. Nobody told you to do that. But you chose to do that. And what happens is Cain reaped what he sowed. You know, when we plant seeds of hatred, when we plant seeds of anger, when we plant seeds of whatever you're planting, you will reap what you sow. And so for the other second part of this is, like God, we may want to help the people we love, right? We want to help the people that we love to make the right decisions. But at the end of the day, it's up to the individual to decide if they will follow God or not. It's up to that individual to decide if they are going to do what is right, or if they're going to live with morals or they're not. They make the decision. You don't. And so, number one, what I need you to understand for some of you, because I hear this all the time, it's not your fault. It's not. I was thinking about, this made me think of when my mother came and visited, my mom and my grandmother 2 years ago. We took them down to Old Messiah. You know how they turned the courthouse into a gift shop? It's amazing. Capitalism, it's great. Anyway, the courthouse is a gift shop, and we're looking at all the souvenirs for Billy the Kid, and then she said something. She said, Billy the Kid's not too much different than James. James was my brother. James was a man who, he had the little man syndrome, Growing up, James wanted to get in fights with everybody. That's just what he did. He'd go up there and fight them, and I didn't know why, okay? He spent a lot of times in the principal's office, and this is back in the day when they could spank, you know what I'm saying? I never got spanked once, okay? Luckily, we called that child abuse. I'm just kidding. But anyway, so I never got spanked in school, but James did. James got spanked all the time. And what happened is, as he got older, he joined the military, and he spent a lot of time in the military jail for getting in bar fights and doing all kinds of other crazy things. He wasn't taught to do that at home. My mom didn't teach him that. That's sure not how he was raised, but that's what he did. I remember when he was a little kid, there was one point that my mom thought that if we move out to the middle of nowhere, Quinlan, Texas, okay? I can't even tell you where that is on a map, all right? That surely he can't get in trouble. Well, the cops came home and brought him home, and he and a friend were vandalizing cars. I always tell people I grew up and learned how to behave by doing the opposite of my brother. But you see, he kept on, and then eventually he ended up getting medically discharged from the Navy, and from there he kept going to bars. I always think my brother wanted to be in a biker gang, I guess, but he ended up marrying a bad person, a woman that he met at a bar, and you know what happened? She killed him. He wasn't taught to do that. We never taught him that. That never came in our household. But he chose to live the life he lived. We went to church a few times in life. That's what we did sometimes. I'm sure that it wasn't taught there either. But he chose to live the life he lived. He reaped what he sowed. And so this makes me think of the old saying is that we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make him drink. We can't. We may want to. We may hurt so bad. And you're right, it still hurts. I still get sad when I think about my brother, and that's been 10 years ago now, I think. Maybe less. It's still raw. I still feel it. But at the end of the day, there was nothing that anybody could do because he chose the life he walked. And so I think the point I have to make to you guys today, because I hear this all the time when I talk to some of you, we get so hurt by our kids or our loved ones and everything else, and I hate to say it, but you cannot carry that burden. You just can't. Because it's not yours to carry. I mean, if you try to do what is right, if you strove to teach good morals in your household, and you strove to show this child that church or community is important, and you strive to live this every day to the best of your ability. I'm not going to say we're perfect because nobody here is perfect. You're going to mess up. But at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do. Because here's what I know about each and every one of you in this room. You've done or you are doing the best that you can do. I know that because I've spoken with most of you. We can't carry that burden. It's not yours to carry, it's the child's. I'm sorry. And so you cannot control your children. You can work on it, you can try, but one thing I've realized in life is I can't control anybody. I can barely control myself at times. Because each child has their own journey to walk. They have their own path to choose. They have to decide, is this going to be important to them or is it not? Are they going to follow Jesus or are they not? And they're going to reap what they sow. In the same way, when I think about my son, who's not born, but Thanksgiving turkey baby, I'm going to love Judah. But at the end of the day, we're going to teach Judah to live the best godly life that we can. We're going to show him that church is important, community is important, morals are important, and we're going to do the best that we can. We're going to fail, but at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, it's going to be up to Judah to decide what he wants to do with his life. I can guide, Camille and I can guide, we can do everything that we can do, but at the end of the day, it's not up to us to decide. It's up to him. And so for some of us, you got to let some of that go. You can't control anybody else but yourself. And so if you've done everything that you can do, there's nothing else you can do. You can continue to love them, right? You can continue to encourage them. But at the end of the day, it's up to them to decide, are they going to follow, are they going to be faithful, or are they not? We don't get to pick that. And in the same way, as I kept saying over and over again about Billy the Kid, there were many opportunities for him to turn his life around. Many. And yet he chose to walk the way he did. He wasn't raised like that. Actually, everywhere I read, he was raised the opposite of it. And yet he chose to walk the way he did. And so, as we end, I want to end with this, is you cannot carry a weight that is not yours to carry. We want to. We're all control freaks, right? And the best thing I have realized in this life is when I realize that I'm not in control and I just give that to God, it's so much better. So let go of some of that weight and take care of what you can take care of. But sometimes those decisions and the weights you carry, they're not yours. They're somebody else's. Can I pray for you? Father, thank you so much for just giving us this time that we can worship you and we can talk about some of these things that are really heavy on our hearts. And Father, I know it's not an easy conversation. But God, nothing worth value of anything isn't really easy. So Father, I just pray that you wrap your peace around us. You give us your hope. And Father, you give us the words to say when it's the right time. But Father, I pray that you give some of our members today, and those who are listening, who carry these heavy burdens, that God, you wrap your peace around them. You wrap your comfort around them. And God, you let them know that they're loved and they did the best that they could do. And Father, I pray for the children that are wanderers and those who really need you, God, that I pray that you open their eyes to see you, to see what you want for them, how you want them to live, God, and not just for them to see it, God, but to turn towards you. Because, God, it hurts. It does hurt. So, Father, I just pray that you open our hearts and our eyes to see your will. Thank you for giving us your Son who lived and died for us so that we could have freedom. Thank you for that. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said,